Moving up to the next column around, this is the point about prioritization based on a good understanding of value, based on perhaps applying some process improvement methodology, applying lean to some of the processes and really working them through to eliminate the elements that aren't adding so much value. Performance improvement, maybe using performance information, maybe using some benchmarking to identify areas of the business where, efficiency looks like it's a bit of an outlier relative to comparators, using that to ask a few more questions, to drill a bit into it, and actually finding there are things that can be done. So the more local, the more tactical savings, which will obviously be in probably just in one little bit of the business rather than anything that gets a bit more all-encompassing. What we've slightly grandly called strategic operational realignment. Again, this isn't necessarily covering the whole of the business, but it's probably getting a little bit more organisation-wide. And under the cost-value ratio, this is thinking very much about there's a lot of different levers that can be pulled to increase the efficiency, the cost-effectiveness of the organisation. They interact with each other. They have intricate relationships with each other. But by getting a really good understanding of the totality and how those relate to each other, and by those I mean the people, the process, the technology, the capital assets, by looking at how those can be deployed collectively in different ways, the cost-value ratio potentially can be improved. Next kind of mini column, as it were. So this is a range of things around changing what customers expect to receive, changing perhaps how they expect to receive it, the online versus the more expensive channels, perhaps considering an alternative delivery model. So thinking, okay, we've got these outcomes in this particular area that we're trying to achieve. At the moment, we're spending an awful lot of money actually delivering a service. Could we achieve the same outcomes more cheaply by a behaviour change campaign, for example? So that sort of thinking through the delivery model quite fundamentally. And then moving up to the last block there, this is really about a whole organisation approach. So looking across the whole organisation, taking the perspective of the whole organisation, having an overall framework within which that covers the whole organisation, within which to think about this, within which to make the prioritisation choices, within which to change the organisation's behaviour and culture fundamentally. So major change programme, something that probably takes 3 to 5 years to fully implement here. Making sure that embedded throughout the whole organisation in its performance management systems, that incentives are in place to operate efficiently, that there's a culture very much of continuous improvement. So those are the stages of our of what we're calling structured cost reduction. This I don't really want to dwell on, but the point we're trying to get across here with this is just to say that really a lot of this is just applying sound, generally understood management practice. Whether you're running a cost reduction program, a major change program that's trying to achieve something else. This is the kind of framework that we would often use to ask questions about whether this is being managed well. So, basic familiar management cycle, no radically new thinking here, but just to kind of emphasize that as far as we're concerned, this kind of framework is very, very useful for understanding whether good value for money has been achieved. And then here what we've tried to do, very much drawing on that kind of body of evidence that NAO has built up over a number of years. Certainly drawing a lot on, we've done quite a lot of work on the Gershon savings. We did quite a lot of work more recently on the CSR 07 savings. We published a report on that a few months ago. So from our experience of looking at the kind of efficiencies that the central government sector, at least, has put forward, has claimed over the last, 6-7 years, these are some of the things that we would draw out and maybe suggest have been missing in the past and maybe can't afford to be missing in the future, given the different scale of the challenge now. An overall organisational approach. This means taking the considered view across the organisation about where the best opportunities really are for achieving cost savings, not applying just an arbitrary percentage equally across the whole business, but really trying to get a good understanding of the levels of efficiency in different parts of the business and the contribution of the different parts of the business to the priorities. We've certainly found from the work that we've done issues with data systems, not generating reliable data, meaning that a lot of what was put forward as being efficiency, value for money savings, hasn't really stood up to scrutiny, to be quite honest, because of the weak data systems that have underpinned them. Really, we're moving into a world now where, this isn't about sort of some very technical definition of what is an efficiency gain. We're not talking about really non-cashable efficiency gains, to use some of the old language. It really ought to be possible now to clearly see cost reductions in the financial statements. So in the accounts, it ought to be possible to transparently understand exactly what cost has been taken out and to reconcile that to statements that are made by organisations about the costs that they have taken out of their business. Prioritisation we've talked about. I probably haven't got that much more to add to that here. To be honest, just to emphasise that our experience so far has been that efficiencies that have been generated haven't necessarily had their origins in a robust prioritisation exercise in the past. The point about risk management transition periods, clearly there are particular risks which I've talked about a few slides ago around the cost reduction programme and the restructurings. But alongside that, at such a time, there are perhaps even greater risks as well around business as usual. Those need to be managed, those need to be thought about as well. A key finding, given that we were saying we didn't think the numbers that were being reported in a lot of cases really stood up to scrutiny in the past. Really what that was saying is that we thought government had under-delivered compared to its targets for efficiency savings. If partway through a year it becomes clear that organisations are going to under-deliver, if there's really fierce ministerial pressure to still be able to claim that the desired amount has been saved, then there is quite a likelihood of some poor short-term decision-making. So the need to have contingencies, the need to have a plan in place for if some of these efficiencies don't come off in the way that we'd intended, what are we going to do, what else is there that we can draw on. We found a lot of problems with baselines, whether that's using a budgeted figure rather than an actual figure as a baseline, whether it's not really not having a baseline that genuinely reflects the underlying costs. So sometimes there will be an aberration in a particular year. There may be some one-off external circumstances that an organisation is able to take advantage of. That kind of distorts the position on underlying costs and probably isn't a useful way of understanding the starting position. And it kind of links to the next point, this rather clunky phrase we've got, run rate costings. What we mean here, this is about, it's the long-term position that we're interested in. It's the underlying costs. It doesn't mean that quick wins, one-off savings aren't useful. They're incredibly useful, but they do need to be understood as such. I think in the past, in central government, there's been a bit of a confusion about what is a sustainable saving and what is just a one-off saving that isn't going to recur the next year. It's very important to understand the difference. And then lastly, take Colin's note off him, embedding continuous improvement. This is the point, we really didn't find that generally there was a culture of staff feeling that their ideas for improving efficiency, value for money are actively wanted by management. There's certainly some great examples of whether it's award schemes or other incentives that are put in place. There were great examples in HMRC, for example, of that. But across the board, we felt an awful lot more could be done. This is in the incentive structure. It's in the way people are performance managed. It's in the kind of questions that their line managers ask them during appraisals. How often does an appraisal discussion take the form of the line manager saying, so, what ideas have you come up with in the last 6 months for improving efficiency, cutting costs? I don't know how often that happens. So it's really getting embedded into all of the organisation systems, So there's a real culture of people wanting to put their ideas forward and knowing that top management will support them if they have good ideas with time and, dare I say, probably maybe a little bit of money too, if there's a clear, if there's a payback that can clearly be demonstrated. Yeah, actually, you probably don't want that, do you? Because you want to go on straight on to the next speaker.